The rubber raft is barely bigger than a kitchen table, and it's the only thing standing between two people and the entire Pacific Ocean. There's no engine, no radio, no land for hundreds of miles in any direction. And they're going to be trapped on it for 117 days. This isn't a movie. This actually happened in 1973 to a British couple named Maurice and Marilyn Bailey. What they went through would break most people within a week. It would test the outer edge of what a human body and a human mind can endure. And by the end of it, they'd have to eat things most of us can't even imagine swallowing, just to see one more sunrise. This is their story. Maurice and Marilyn weren't reckless adventurers chasing danger. They were a quiet, ordinary couple from England who'd fallen in love with the idea of a simpler life. Maurice had spent years working, saving, dreaming of the sea. Marilyn was right there with him, just as determined, just as ready to leave the gray skies of home behind. They bought a 31-foot yacht. They named her Orlin. To them, she wasn't just a boat. She was freedom. She was the culmination of years of planning, of budgeting, of late nights poring over charts and sailing manuals. They sold what they had, said goodbye to the life they knew, and set out to sail around the world together. For months, it worked. They crossed oceans. They saw places most people only see in photographs. They were living the dream they'd built for years, just the two of them against the horizon. But the Pacific Ocean does not care about anyone's dreams. On March 4th, 1973, Maurice and Marilyn were sailing through open water, far from any shipping lane, far from any coastline, when something struck the hull of their boat with a force that nearly knocked them off their feet. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't debris. It was a whale. A sperm whale, enormous and very much alive, had collided with Orlin's hull, and the impact tore a hole straight through the wood. Water began pouring in almost immediately. Maurice went below deck and saw it with his own eyes. The ocean was already flooding in, faster than they could ever hope to bail it out. There was no time to grieve the loss of the boat. There was only time to survive the next few minutes. They had a life raft and a small inflatable dinghy, and they scrambled to gather whatever they could before Orlin went under. Tins of food, a little bit of water, a knife, some fishing gear, flares. It was chaos, grabbing at anything within reach while the deck tilted further and further beneath their feet. And then, in a matter of minutes, the boat that had carried them across an ocean, the boat that held every plan they'd made for their future, simply slipped beneath the waves and was gone. Maurice and Marilyn were now floating in a life raft tethered to a small rubber dinghy somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with no way to call for help and no way to know if anyone would ever come looking. At first, they told themselves this would be temporary. Surely a ship would spot them. Surely rescue was only days away. They had no idea what was actually coming. The first few days were about taking stock. What did they have? What would it last? Maurice, methodical by nature, began rationing everything immediately, because he understood something that would define the next few months of their lives. Hope without discipline gets people killed out here. The water they'd managed to save wouldn't last more than a week or two if they drank normally. The food they'd grabbed wasn't meant to sustain two adults for months. It was meant for emergencies measured in days, not seasons. But days turned into a week. A week turned into 2. And still, no ship came. There's a particular kind of silence out on the open ocean that people who haven't experienced it can't really picture. It's not peaceful. It's not calming. It's the sound of nothing, stretching in every direction, for as far as the eye can see. No engines, no voices. Just water meeting sky at a horizon that never seems to change, no matter how long you stare at it. Marilyn later described how the raft would rise and fall with each swell, and how, in that motion, you start losing track of what day it even is. Time stops meaning anything when every hour looks exactly like the one before it. They rationed sips of water like they were rationing gold. A few crackers, split evenly, became a meal. The initial supplies, the ones they'd grabbed in that frantic scramble before Orlin sank, were already running dangerously low by the end of the first month. And that's when the real fight for survival began. Maurice started fishing, using whatever he could fashion into hooks and lines. Some days, he'd catch something. Many days, he wouldn't. The ocean doesn't hand out food. It makes you earn every single bite. And some days, no matter how hard you try, it gives you nothing at all. They caught what they could. Small fish. Occasionally something larger. And when the fish weren't biting, they turned to something that would have horrified them back home in England. Turtles. Sea turtles would sometimes drift close to the raft, and Maurice and Marilyn learned, out of sheer necessity, how to catch them and use every single part for survival. Not just the meat, the blood, which they drank because the water wasn't enough, the organs. Nothing was wasted, because wasting anything out here could mean the difference between living another week or not. Think about that for a moment. Two people who had never imagined themselves capable of something like this, forced by hunger and thirst into decisions that would have seemed unthinkable back on dry land. Marilyn, in many accounts of their ordeal, emerges as the one who refused to let the will to live slip away. She kept a journal. She tracked the days. She insisted on small rituals, tiny acts of normalcy, because in a situation with no structure at all, structure becomes the thing that keeps you sane. She'd note the weather. She'd note what they ate. She'd note, again and again, the ships that passed in the distance and never saw them. And that detail might be the most gutting part of this entire story, because ships did pass. Over the course of their ordeal, Maurice and Marilyn spotted numerous vessels on the horizon, ships that could have ended their nightmare in an instant. They fired flares. They waved. They did everything two exhausted, sunburned, starving people could possibly do to be seen. And ship after ship sailed right past them, disappearing back over the horizon as if they'd never been there at all. Imagine the specific kind of devastation in that moment. Not the slow despair of nothing happening, but the sharp, cutting pain of hope, rising and then being crushed over and over. Every time a ship appeared and then vanished without ever turning toward them. How many times can a person's heart survive that particular kind of disappointment before something inside them starts to break? But here's the thing about Maurice and Marilyn Bailey. Neither of them broke. As weeks bled into months, their bodies deteriorated in ways that are hard to fully describe. Sunburn turned to blistering. Their skin cracked from constant exposure to salt water. Weight fell off both of them as their bodies consumed whatever reserves they had left. Sores developed from sitting in the same cramped position day after day, week after week, in a raft that was never designed to hold two people for more than a few days, let alone months. And still, they kept fishing. They kept collecting rainwater when it came. They kept talking to each other, because in isolation, that complete conversation becomes a lifeline, just as real as food or water. Marilyn would later describe how they made a kind of pact with each other, an unspoken agreement to keep pushing the other person forward on the days when giving up felt easier than continuing. When Maurice's spirit dipped, Marilyn found the strength for both of them. When Marilyn struggled, Maurice did the same. That's the part of this story that isn't about the ocean, or the whale, or the raft at all. It's about what happens between two people when everything else in the world falls away, and all that's left is each other. By day 60, they'd been drifting for 2 full months. By day 90, 3 months. Every single day carried the same brutal routine. Check the water supply, check for fish, check the horizon, scan for ships, and try somehow to hold on to the idea that this would eventually end. The physical toll was staggering. Both of them had lost a significant amount of body weight. Their bodies were surviving on the barest minimum a human can consume and still function. And yet somehow, they kept functioning. They kept making decisions. They kept problem solving, kept adapting, kept refusing to simply let the ocean decide their fate for them. There's something almost unbelievable about the fact that this went on for 117 days. That's nearly 4 months. 4 months of salt water, sunburn, hunger, and the crushing psychological weight of watching potential rescue sail past again and again. Most survival stories end far sooner, one way or another. This one just kept going. And then, on June 30th, 1973, everything changed. A Korean fishing vessel appeared on the horizon. By this point, Maurice and Marilyn had learned not to let hope rise too quickly, because hope had betrayed them so many times before. But something about this ship was different. It wasn't disappearing. It wasn't sailing past. It was turning toward them. The crew of the fishing boat spotted the raft, spotted the two skeletal, sunburned figures inside it, and understood immediately what they were looking at. After 117 days adrift in the Pacific Ocean, Maurice and Marilyn Bailey were finally, actually, being rescued. Try to imagine that moment. After nearly 4 months of watching ships vanish over the horizon, after nearly 4 months of rationing water by the sip and eating things that once would have turned their stomachs, after nearly 4 months of not knowing if today would be the day they simply didn't wake up, someone finally saw them. Someone finally turned the wheel and came closer instead of sailing away. The relief in that moment must have been almost impossible to process. Not relief like winning something small, but relief on the scale of an entire life being handed back to you when you genuinely stopped being sure it ever would be. Maurice and Marilyn were brought aboard, given food, given water, given medical attention for bodies that had been pushed about as far as a human body can be pushed. And for the first time in 117 days, they didn't have to scan the horizon for the next ship, because they were finally standing on the deck of one. What makes their story so remarkable isn't just that they survived, though surviving that long adrift with almost nothing is its own kind of miracle. It's how they survived. It's how they survived. It's the discipline Maurice brought to rationing supplies that most people would have burned through in the first 2 weeks. It's the resilience Marilyn brought, keeping a journal, keeping track of time, refusing to let the days blur into meaningless nothing. It's the way they held each other up when either one of them, alone, might not have made it. After their rescue, Maurice and Marilyn didn't retreat from the ocean the way you might expect. In the years that followed, they continued sailing, continued living lives shaped by the water that had nearly killed them. Their ordeal became one of the most extraordinary survival stories of the 20th century, documented and studied precisely because it pushed the boundaries of what people believed was survivable. 117 days, no engine, no radio, ship after ship sailing past without ever seeing them, and two people who simply refused to stop fighting for each other, one single day at a time, until finally, somehow, the ocean let them go. If a story like this hits different when you hear it out loud, that's exactly why this channel exists. Real survival stories, real people, told the way they deserve to be told. If you want more of these, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what part stuck with you the most, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.